All right, welcome back. Hope you're able to enjoy the coffee and donuts out in the hallway. Oh, wait, that's for a live conference, not a virtual one. So next up, we have Brett Pettigrew. He is agricultural engineer with the NRCS based in Brookings, South Dakota. And he is going to talk about NRCS assisted watershed dams, history, condition of structures, rehabilitation, and DamWatch. So with that, Brett, I will let you take it away.
All right. Thank you, John. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today to the group. I will share my screen. Is my screen showing up? All right.
You are good.
All right. Well, thanks, John. Yeah, like John said, I'm Brett Pettigrew. I'm with the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. I'm the area engineer in our Brookings Field Support Office. I'm going to talk today a little bit about what we call our watershed dams with NRCS. And I'm going to, like a couple of people did already this morning, they kind of told a little bit of a story about the history of those. So I'm going to do that, kind of talk about the condition that they're at, and then really where we're at today with all these structures. To start off, you know, when I give this presentation to a live group, I always ask everybody, you know, when you think back or you think of stories that you were told from the 1930s, what do you think about? And everybody says the Dust Bowl, the Dirty 30s, a drought. And ironically, in 1936, Congress authorized the USDA to determine how to address flood control. There was a lot of flood control issues in the Midwest of the United States. There's a lot of land use changes. Some municipalities and homes were built probably where they shouldn't have in floodplains, and there was a lot of flooding issues. So Congress authorized our agency to look into how to address those. And a main piece of what came out of that was the idea that conservation land treatment could address some of these flooding issues. So then a series of different acts that Congress passed authorized what I'll call watershed projects. Initially in 1944 with the Flood Control Act, and then 1954 which is the Protection and Flood Control Act. We call that PL 566. And then 1962, the RC&D program was authorized to participate also in these watershed programs. So that really got the ball rolling on these watershed projects. And later in my presentation, I'll talk about the rehab process, and that was authorized in 2001 with federal dollars to rehab some of these dams. So when we talk about the watershed program, you know, it was really a partnership program, and the different players in it were, you know, federally, the Natural Resources Conservation Service was the main player, and you know, we were involved in the planning, the design, the construction of these on the financial side and the technical side. And if you really think about that, that was really all stuff up front. It was at the beginning of the projects. Locally, we created watershed districts as part of this program that had the really the operation and maintenance. Long term, that was their role in these watershed districts. And then private, I'm going to say all, but almost everything I say is almost all in this presentation. Most of these dams are put on private grounds, so easements were provided by the local landowners for access to do operation and maintenance and any rehabilitation or inspections of these dams. And then there was also some state funding and technical support on some of the dams and watershed districts. So, you know, why did these get done? I would say that, you know, the purposes of these dams are multifold. A lot of NRCS, we do conservation practices, and some of them are really specific in what we're doing them for. But these watershed dams, there was several purposes, and I'd say the main six are flood control, sediment collection, Erosion control water supply. Several of these dams are municipal water supplies for municipalities. And then wildlife and recreation. So a whole slew of purposes, and they really varied with each watershed district and each dam. So when were these built? You know, those acts in the 30s, 40s, 50s. You know, this is a graph of when these dams were actually constructed. So, and essentially, there's hardly any new ones being constructed through this program. So today it stands at approximately 11,841 dams in 1,300 watershed districts in 47 states. So it's almost the entire United States that these were put in. You know, and the peak of the construction was in the 1960s, you know, and then through the 70s, but really the peak was in the 60s. And you can see here's a map of where all those watershed districts are, you know, and they're essentially spread out throughout the entire United States. And I'll focus a little bit on South Dakota today, nationally and South Dakota. So you can see South Dakota had a lot of these RC&D projects, so that where those really weren't as much throughout the whole United States, but South Dakota did take advantage of the RC&D program for some of these watershed projects. One thing I'll refer to today is the National Inventory of Dams. The Corps of Engineers has this database of dams. And I would say they're kind of the large dams or the high-risk dams. You get a dam falls into that database if you're high hazard, which, you know, it's a significant loss of life would occur if the dam would fail, is likely. And then there's significant hazard, which is possible human life would be lost. And it's likely to have property destruction. And then you can read on there, or if you're a 25-foot high dam with 15 acre-feet of storage, or a 50 acre-feet storage dam that's 6 feet tall. So again, it's really the larger dams. So this changes over time, but roughly there's about 90,000 dams in the United States on this inventory. And 33,000 of them were designed and installed by the NRCS. So, or excuse me, the USDA, sorry. 500 or so are on Forest Service ground that are owned by the Forest Service. Another 3,500 are non-federal dams on Forest Service land. And then roughly 29,000 dams are designed by the NRCS in this database. So point there, you know, NRCS has had a huge history of constructing dams throughout the United States. And 11,800 of those are these watershed dams that I'm talking about today. So just to show a little bit of scale of what these dams do, you know, Paula talked about the watershed of Lake Mitchell. You know, if you combine the watershed, the drainage area of all these dams, all these 11,800 or so dams, it's 48,262 square miles. That's roughly about 220 miles square. So it's a significant amount of area that's being attenuated, the flow, where, you know, we're controlling that flow for downstream flooding. About 320,000 acres of total reservoir surface area. And that by that classification on the National Inventory of Dams, it's almost 2,200 are high hazard. So a lot of them are, if they failed, we could have likely for a loss of life. So specifically for South Dakota, we only have 102 of these dams, and we have 0 that are high hazard. So most of them are low hazard dams in South Dakota. And where are they at? Here's a map. You know, a lot of them are in the southern part of the state, but those are the watershed districts. Each of the different colors there, each of those spots on the map are a specific dam, those 102 dams. So specifically, there's about 45 of these structures in 5 watershed districts in southern Lincoln and northern Union County. Again, these are on private land, so you really don't know they're there unless you really know what you're looking for, or you're out in the middle of a section of land somewhere looking for it. And then there's another spot with the Randall RC&D and the Spring Bowl watersheds watershed districts in Charles Mix, Bonham, and Gregory County. So those are our two main clusters of dams. You know, that's about 75 of them in those two areas in South Dakota. A couple examples of these. One of our state parks, Lake Lakota, is actually Paddy Creek #1. You know, it did have significant flows in 2014. That was the first time it ever flowed through the auxiliary spillway, but it did perform well. This picture in the lower left is the downstream road from that dam. And water did go over the road, but that dam performed pretty well in that case. We have some with very few, but most of them have pipe principal spillways, but Union Creek #14 does have a spillway similar to what you'd see on like a Lake Mitchell. And then Spring Bowl 2C, another example. This is our kind of our prototypical NRCS principal spillway riser, where the water enters from below, which can help it keep it from plugging from material. A lot of those risers that NRCS put in across the country. So where are we at today then on how, you know, on the maintenance and the essentially what these how they're performing today? In 2020, out of those almost 12,000 dams, about half of them have reached their service life, and the majority of these were 50-year service lives. Some were 100, but the vast majority of them were 50 years. So again, in 1970, about half the dams were built at that point. So 50 years later, half of them have reached their service life. In South Dakota, 52 out of our 102 have reached their service life, and we're going to have another 20 or so of them reach their service life in the next 5 years. So we're getting to the point where, you know, almost 75% of them reach their service life very shortly. I've given a similar presentation before, and I've always said in the past that we've never had any of these dams fail. But I had to add a slide to this presentation now. We did have one of our watershed dams down by Alcester, South Dakota, did fail in March of 2019. It's the same storm event that the Spencer Dam on the Niobrara failed. This was that same storm event. There was a kind of a combination of factors with snow and frozen ground and a plugged principal spillway and an obstruction and auxiliary spillway. A lot of times dam failures are caused by a multitude of factors, and this was one of those where we had a multitude of factors that caused the washed out auxiliary spillway. So with that, we do have a lot of just maintenance issues on these dams. We have sedimentation in the pool areas and outlet channels, and then issues with the pipes, whether they're corroded, they're misaligned, and drawdown pipes on these are essentially not functioning because there's so much sediment in the pool areas. So a few pictures of these. Here's some corrosion on some of the pipes. Do have corrugated metal pipes, and there's corrosion on those. Eventually they fail. Sedimentation in the outlet channels. These are both outlet channels where there should be a principal spillway pipe that flows out. We get sedimentation in the outlet channels, and it obstructs the flow. We don't get the flow we need. Misalignment of our spillways. A lot of it is from freeze-thaw action on the outlet structures. They essentially move up, and it causes the water to sit in those pipes, and it causes them to rust a little bit quicker. So next steps. Really, we need to monitor them, we need to keep an eye on them, and we need to do rehabilitation. So like I said before, that in 2001, the small watershed rehab program was authorized by Congress. And as of April of this year, 366 projects had been funded with those dollars. And that would be specific dams are funded to be fixed. And the ones that have actually been done are 160 out of those almost 12,000. So it's a very, very small, only 1.4% of them have been rehabbed out of about 50% that are at their service life. Here's the dollars that have been appropriated since 2001 through that program. It's almost $800 million. So just roughly, you can kind of get a feel for the dams that are being rehabbed at this point are enormous structures that cost multi-million dollars to rehab. So a lot of dollars, but it doesn't go very far when you have 12,000 dams to rehab. You know, our South Dakota ones are not wouldn't take near that much money, but we need a lot more money to get these rehabbed. So as far as monitoring goes, I'm going to quickly talk about NRCS nationally has started using a tool called DamWatch. It's a web-based monitoring tool where we have all of our national inventory dams, all our watershed dams in this web-based tool where we can keep information on these dams. We keep our construction plans for them. We can keep our pictures. We can keep our inspection reports in this DamWatch program. But mainly what it does is there's information from each of the structures, and this website is tied to both USGS stream gauge data and NexRad radar data, and it can give us alerts basically when it's anticipated that like an auxiliary spillway would flow, you know, which would maybe be just supposed to flow during a 25-year or 50-year event. And then it has the ability to automatically send text messages to cell phones or emails to different project sponsors or NRCS employees. So it's a great way, and we're kind of just on the beginning of it, to basically alert the general public. Emergency management folks in county offices can get alerts. You know, when a dam might be flowing through the auxiliary spillway or might fail. So again, we're kind of at the beginning of this, but I think it has a lot of promise going forward. So we basically can set thresholds for different rain events, and then we'll get alerts. As far as our NexRad alert, there's a whole bunch of different kind of alerts in there, but you know, in 2016, for example, we had over 2,000 alerts on all of the structures, and then the high hazard structures, which again, where loss of life is likely, we had 200 alerts. So, and I have a couple pictures. This is just kind of the interface. This is, you know, Southeast South Dakota, where we have a lot of those structures. You can get a list view of showing the different structures. You know, you can zoom in, and this is Paddy Creek #1, Lake Lakota, and you can get the specific information from a structure. You know, here it has when it was built, the hazard classification. Here you have information like the CFS of the auxiliary spillway, the drainage area. And here's an alert where it would be a predictive alert over, you know, I think this is like a 48-hour, 42-hour alert where the amount of rain over that time period would send an alert to whoever is signed up for DamWatch that, hey, you need to keep an eye out downstream of this dam. We got a big event that might flow through the auxiliary spillway. With that, I guess if there's any questions, and I'd also like to, I'd like to say if anybody has any interest or is part of any organization that would like to partner on doing some rehab of the South Dakota structures, we aren't going to probably get much of the federal money to rehab any of those, but if anybody wants to partner on doing any rehab on these structures, you have my email and you can contact me.
Great, thanks, Brett. Looks like a really nice tool. So a question from Jay, in that these dams have a definite design life, what requirements are in place for the local sponsors to prepare for the eventual replacement or rehabilitation of the structure? And then absent this, are there any plans to decommission dams that are not being maintained?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, the way the watershed districts are set up, they have taxing authority on the acres that are in those watersheds, the benefited acres. So they're responsible for any decommissioning or any maintenance or any rehabilitation, essentially, of those structures. Um, so it's really up to each individual watershed district to make those determinations on what's best. When they received the federal funding initially, they had an obligation for the surface life of the dam for 50 years to maintain it. Once you get past the 50 years, they could choose to decommission. They could choose to, continue doing maintenance and keeping the dam up for decades to come. So it's really up to the watershed district to make those calls.
Gotcha. All right. I don't see any other questions. Thanks, Brett. That was very interesting. Good tool, especially if you live downstream of one of those dams. I would definitely be signing up for those alerts.